if you're going to bother making a presentation of any kind, please tell me before you start. I don't have to be in the audience, just me, Seth. What change are you seeking to make? Are you very clear about the change you seek? Is it possible at the end of the talk that that change will have happened? If not, don't bother. If you can make that change happen, now you're on to something.
Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hi, Seth. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. It's good to talk to you.
Seth, I told you before we got started, but again, I want to share the same thing in public. Thank you so much for your time. For me, it's an honor. We've been introduced by a mutual friend, Gar Reynolds, and I'm sure many people tell you the same thing. There's a reason for it, but I'm a big fan of your work, your writing, your blog, everything you do. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Wow, that's very kind of you. Thanks.
Seth, today I'd like to talk about the main thing I'd like to explore with you is your ideas around how to get our ideas to spread. You talked about it many times in your writing, in your work, and it's very much connected to the theme of our podcast, which is around communication, public speaking, presentations. But before we do that, in preparation for this conversation, I did a bit of research and I saw something which is not connected, but I found it very interesting. I saw that you are leading a project that you describe as the most important project of your career, the Carbon Almanac. For those who don't know anything about it, would you like to tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, I might think it's one of the most important projects of anyone's career, but it certainly had a huge impact on me. About 2 years ago, it occurred to me that I wasn't talking about our climate problem very much. Even though I wrote my first blog post about it 18 years ago, I wasn't doing it a lot because I felt stupid. I felt underinformed. I felt like a hypocrite. And I figured if I had that problem, maybe other people did as well. Because there are very powerful industrial forces that want to confuse us and distract us. And when scientists show up, sometimes they're not that good at telling a clear, simple, understandable story. Well, those are things I'm supposed to be good at. So I used my experience having built almanacs in the past, but instead of doing it, I organized it. And as a volunteer, I worked full-time for over a year, every single day. I helped put together a group of 300 other volunteers, which is now 1,900 volunteers in 90 countries around the world. And we wrote, edited, laid out, typeset, graphed, charted, footnoted, fact-checked a 97,000 word almanac. And we did the whole thing as a team, as volunteers, in less than 5 months. We didn't make one substantial error, and the book has been translated into many languages, including Italian and Czech and Japanese and Chinese. And the community persists to this day, a year after the book came out.
We're going to include the link in the show notes after the recording. And Seth, now if we talk about how to get our ideas to spread, one of the things you talk about is that success is not just about your idea, it's not just about your product or your service, it's also mainly about can you get your ideas to spread. So can you tell us more about this? The success is not just about the idea, it's also mainly about can you get your ideas to spread?
Okay, well, the success might be just about the idea. It depends on what you want. Let's think about Ignaz Semmelweis, who worked in Austria. He was in charge of 2 hospitals in the 1800s. And what he found was that they were both maternity hospitals. One was a teaching hospital filled with doctors. One was a poor woman's hospital filled with midwives. And what he found was that if you gave birth at the teaching hospital, you were 9 times more likely to die in childbirth than if you gave birth at the poor woman's hospital. In fact, rich women were pretending they were poor so they wouldn't have to go to the hospital where they were so much more likely to die. And in order to figure out how to solve the problem, Ignaz had to develop a version of germ theory, which hadn't been published yet, and develop a version of statistics, which weren't understood yet. And the paper he wrote about it, which you can read in translation on my Medium post, is breathtakingly brilliant. And he solved the problem. He figured it out. It turns out that the doctors at the teaching hospital were also regularly doing autopsies. And they would go from doing an autopsy to delivering a baby without washing their hands. And he, using rigorous statistics, proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he could lower within one day the death rate by a factor of 9 just by doing this one thing. So that's a brilliant idea. You should win the Nobel Prize for that. But here's the sad thing. For more than 20 years, even though he published his work, no other hospital started washing their hands. And he was so frustrated by these 20 years of being unable to spread his idea that he had a nervous breakdown. They put him in a mental institution and the guards beat him to death within 2 weeks. So sometimes it's a matter of life or death to get your ideas to spread.
It's important. And when we think about spreading our ideas, communicating, also more specifically speaking in public, there's a common fear, if we want, not for everybody, but for many people, we fear that. And in one of your blogs, you wrote that there are 2 errors that lead to fear. And I have them here. You say that one is that we believe as speakers or communicators in general that we are being actively judged. So that's the first error. And the second one is that we believe that the subject of the talk is us. Whereas you say that we should be treating our talks, our communication in general, as a gift. You also talk a lot about the importance of empathy, including empathy into our work, which goes beyond public speaking. But if you think about communication in particular, can you explore, it would be great if you could explore these ideas in a little bit more detail, some key errors that lead to fear.
Okay, so there's so many layers to what's going on here. First thing is, let's start with this. Why didn't Semmelweis's idea spread? Is it that he was wrong? No, he was correct. Is it that it was a bad idea? No, in fact, it has ended up saving millions and millions and millions of lives. So why didn't it spread? It didn't spread because any doctor who could have spoken up about it felt like their personal agenda of status and affiliation, of security, wouldn't be advanced by bringing this up. He didn't build around the facts the story that made other people want to spread it. And so now if we go, way to the future by a couple hundred years to TED Talks, Sir Ken, the late Sir Ken, my friend, had for a long time the most popular TED Talk in history. Why did it spread? Is it because he said 10 things in it that had never been said about education? I don't think so, and neither did he. It spread because A, it was fun to watch, and B, spreading it raised your status, your connection, your whatever when you sent it to somebody else. Susan Cain, another friend of mine who lives right across the river, ironically did one of the most popular TED Talks about shyness, which is weird because she's shy, and yet she stood up on stage and talked about it. Why did it spread? It spread because shy people found that their status would go up if they sent it to somebody else. And so when we think about fear, if you're going to get up on stage, it's easy to imagine that people know you, understand you, and are judging you. None of those things are true. What's actually happening is they are seeing a version of you who is putting on a performance. And if that performance doesn't work, that's not you that didn't work. It's your choice that didn't work. So if you're going to go unlock a door and you've got 5 keys, you should feel no fear about which key you're going to try in the door. It's not personal. It's just which key did you pick? Well, the same thing is true in the craft of giving a talk. You're looking for a key. The risk is very, very low because you're not going to start on the main stage of TED. I promise you're not. You're going to start in front of 5 people or 6 people or 12 people. And by the 40th time you give a talk, if you have been willing to try different keys, you will find one that leads to something that will spread. But if you say, nope, this is personal, I have to be authentic, this is the real me, and if I'm wrong, they will kill me, then I'm not surprised you're afraid.
Seth, because you use the word authentic, you also, I think it was in one of your blogs or maybe one of your books, I don't remember exactly where, but you talked about, and I agree with you 100%, I love this concept. You talk about the difference between authenticity and doing what works for you to achieve your objective, or authenticity versus empathy. The empathy to imagine what story would resonate with the audience. So you say, rather than focusing on being authentic, we should be focusing on building empathy with the audience and doing what actually works. Again, it would be great if you could add something. So what's your take on this?
So imagine that you're a doctor and it's the end of an 18-hour shift. You got trouble at home, you're burned out, and you got one patient left to see. You look at the x-ray and you realize that patient has significant growths inside of them. The authentic thing would be to say, look, I'm tired. You're going to die really soon, and go home. And if they say, I want a second opinion, you could say, okay, you're ugly too, because that's the way you feel right now. But that's not what a professional would do. A professional understands that your craft, your work, is to be there for the person across the table, not to authentically deliver how cranky you are, but to do exactly the opposite. And my friend Zig Ziglar was totally different in real life and backstage than he was in front of 22,000 people the one time we worked together. It was like seeing the balloons at the Macy's Day Parade. They came back, we were sitting in the green room, and they came back and they said, Mr. Ziglar, 5 minutes. And he went, and they just like inflated him. And he got 3 inches taller, and his heartbeat changed and his affect changed. He went on stage and he was Zig Ziglar. Backstage, he was just Zig. And is there something wrong with that? I don't think there's something wrong with that. I think that's generous.
Yeah, love it. And Seth, there's also another article that you wrote, which I found very interesting. You wrote that many of your talks make people uncomfortable, and you are proud of that. And you say, or you said at least in the article, that you always try to create a bit of tension between what's there and what could be there, between what we do and what we could do instead. Can you tell us a little bit more about this idea of either making people uncomfortable or creating that tension for the audience?
So tension isn't the same as stress. Stress is a bad thing. Stress leads to trauma. Tension is not the desire to be there and here at the same time, not the desire to stay and to go at the same time. That's what stress is. Tension is anticipation. Tension is what happens when we pull a rubber band backwards before we let it go and it flies across the room. Tension is the requirement if change is going to happen. There's always tension before change happens. If you're in a restaurant and you're ordering a food you have never eaten before, there's still tension because that's a little bit of a leap. So when we show up in front of the room, why don't we just send a memo instead? Because a memo is a much more reliable, asynchronous, efficient way to send someone some information. Sorry, that's the fire department. And we don't do that because public speaking is actually not about the transference of information. It's about the transference of emotion. Because what we are saying is, this is important enough for me to talk to you in real time. And what we're saying is, I need to create tension here, or else it's just going to bounce right off your head. And this is why so much organized schooling is banal and vapid and boring because the only tension they can figure out how to create is the test. And that wears us out really fast. And the last part I'll add to this is there's a convention that has taken hold. And I would say that TED has amplified this, that you should memorize your talk. And what we know is that human beings, except for the highest tier of professional actors, speak differently when they are reading something they know by heart. And it's because usually when we talk, we don't know how the sentence is going to end until we hear it. But when we've memorized something, we do. If you show up with a memorized talk, the chances that you will create the tension you seek go way down because the energy that you are transmitting is totally different. And so in my 5 TED Talks, none of them are memorized because I cared enough about the audience to take the risk. And I think that if they were able to offer me a chance to give another one, they'd insist I memorize it and I wouldn't show up because you can do better than that.
And you said something which I think we were talking about Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds, where that there's a contribution from you there. And you talk about the fact that communication or public speaking is the transfer of emotion. I think you wrote it there. And in the same part of the book, you also mentioned that the reason why, or something which is connected to this, which is the fact that people want you as the communicator, as the speaker, to touch in a way both parts of their brain. We've got the logical part and the emotional part. And it's not that logic is not important. I think that's what you mean, but logic alone is not enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the hack which was controversial when I said it, and is now much more common, is your slides should just have pictures on them, no words whatsoever. They're not cue cards. When you put up a picture, now you can tell me a story about it. You can create tension. You can use it as a punchline. You can use it to start the story. You can use it to finish the story. You can use it to talk about something that isn't on the picture and let their own brains make the conclusion between what's in the picture and what you just said. So I show up with 180, 250 pictures, and I can talk for 50 minutes. That's, less than a minute per picture by far. And now you've got 2 things coming at you. You've got my voice, the logical construct of a narrative, and you've got these pictures, which are going to a totally different part of your brain. If you can connect them as I'm talking, I am firing way more synapses than if somebody's just standing there with a memorized speech.
Yeah. And now you're saying pictures with no words. I think in Presentation Zen, you talk about maximum 6 words on the screen.
I was compromising.
Yeah. That was a compromise. All right. Now, there's another thing, again, that you wrote in your blog, which I like. You say that sometimes acknowledging that you don't know something is useful. It's a sign of confidence. It may sound counterintuitive, but of course, yeah, it's a sign of confidence, awareness. And I see that happening all the time as speakers, presenters. If I think about our audience, Seth, or our clients, we speak in public and then we get questions from an audience, which is good. And then if we get a question and we don't have the answer to that question, we feel the need to try and come up with an answer, even if we don't have the answer. But you say, well, actually, if you acknowledge that you don't know it, it's a sign of confidence. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, just because you have the microphone doesn't mean you're in charge, and it doesn't mean that you're filled with wisdom. It just means you have the microphone. So part of transferring emotion, it's also transferring confidence and authority. And if you make stuff up, then you inevitably will lose that. And it also doesn't scale for the long haul, so it's probably not a good plan. I could argue that even if you do know the answer, there are times it makes sense to say, I don't know. Because the very fact that you did that is part of your performance helps the audience come to the conclusion that the other stuff you answered, you might actually know. And so that's interesting. And the other thing, which you didn't ask about, one of the other tropes about public speaking by amateurs, two parts, is either you should start with a joke or you should start by clearing your throat and talking about the fact that you're a little nervous, as if that's some sort of authenticity. People have heard both of those things from folks who are better at them than you. And what I have found is that the best way to start a talk is to start in the middle, not at the beginning. And that could mean just starting with a question. It could mean take the minute of throat clearing and apologizing and joking you were going to do, skip that minute and just go right to where you were going to start. Because that momentum will get you a long way. The problem with the other approach is you're waiting for the audience to come back to you. So what I used to do when I flew for work and did a lot more live events is I would begin with a simple exercise that I could say in one sentence, and then there would be a response from the group. And if the group didn't respond well, I knew that the rest of the talk wasn't my fault, because they began before I even opened my mouth as a low response audience. So I wasn't going to judge my performance based on their response, because they were already level setting me that their response was going to be low. On the other hand, if the first sentence got this overwhelming response, I said, all right, now I've level set. If I can't keep it here, then that's on me, right? But if you show up waiting for the audience to smile and nod and be with you, that's great if it works. But then what are you going to do when it doesn't? You can't be a professional and count on them to be your partner every time.
We need to find other and more effective ways to hook the audience, to capture their attention from the very beginning. And Seth, there's another something else I saw online in your blog. I think it was a blog with just one or two sentences, but which was great and it brings so many implications. And I think it was something like, if everything is in bold, then none of it is in bold. Something along those lines. And if we think about it, if we think about public speaking, both from a content perspective, where we need to identify a key messages or the key supporting points, but also you were talking about slides, like no text, images, even from a slide design perspective, if we think that everything is in bold, then the reality is that for the audience, nothing is in bold. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, I think you just said it perfectly. I have nothing to add.
Nothing to add?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay, fantastic. Let's continue then. All right. So in one of your latest books, This is Marketing, which I've read, by the way, is it? Yeah, it's that. Yeah. This is Marketing, which is not your last book, but it's one of your last books. You talk about something which is useful from a marketing perspective, from a business perspective, and it has implications in communication as well, which is also hard to do. Also for me, I resist to that, but I understand the principle. You say that we need to be very specific about the people we are seeking to serve. And you ask your reader to ask themselves a question. The question is, what's the smallest market you can survive on? The smallest, not the biggest. What's the smallest market we can survive on? And then you go further. You say, well, then once you know what the market is, you need to find a corner of that market. We need to go to the extremes. And again, that has implications in communication. I run my own business here, Seth, in the UK. And although I know that this is true, it's a great principle, it's a great piece of advice, sometimes I find it hard to implement it. Again, I'd love for you to share some ideas around this going to the extremes.
Well, let's do the public speaking one, and then I can talk about a small firm like yours. If there are 500 people in the audience, you can give a pretty good speech that will get an 8 or 7 from 460 of those people. And almost no one is going to remember what you talked about in a week, and almost no one is going to spread your idea. But you could also give a talk to 50 of those people, ignoring the other 450, that gets a 10, that changes their life, that resonates with them. Which do you prefer? Because it's a choice. And the people, the 50 you pick, they might be the most influential ones, they might be the most powerful ones, they might be the ones that are most likely to talk about it. You have to pick what persona you're trying to speak to, but only when you pick do you have a chance. So in the US, comedians like Jerry Seinfeld are very, very rare. The chance that you will be a comedian who almost everybody thinks is a little funny is very rare. On the other hand, you can choose to be the kind of comedian that's like Stephen Wright. Most people don't get Stephen Wright, but the people who do will travel across the country to hear him. So when we think about a business that wants to help people with public communication, it's easy to say everyone needs to be good at this because everyone needs to communicate, and sooner or later, everyone will do it in public. That means your business is going to go out of business. You have no chance. Because the only people who are going to hire you are people who A, have the problem, and B, are the kind of people who hire someone to help them solve the problem. So we've already made the audience much smaller. And then we say, all right, among that group of people, some of those people already have a coach, a firm, or whatever. So they're off the list. So we can work our way down to, well, actually, I'm only here for 100 people. And what these 100 people have in common is these things. That is what I'm going to be the best in the world at.
Yeah, love it. And before as we approach the conclusion of our chat, Seth, you also gave a practical communication piece of advice, many others, but this one in particular in your blog. And I have it here. You say, avoid unnecessary amplifiers. And you give some examples. For example, this is extremely unique versus this is unique. Or I'm very upset versus I'm upset. I love you a ton versus I love you. And you say that sometimes more words are not better. Why is that for our listeners? Can you explain this?
I think it goes back to tension. When we follow in the footsteps of the TV commercial marketer who understands that adjectives are free and just keeps amping up the energy, we have lulled our listeners into a state of ignoring us. But if we create tension simply by using fewer words and leaving more space, we're more vivid. It's either on or it's off. It's either here or it's not. I'm either talking or I'm quiet. There's not as much mumbling. And we end up adding all these adjectives as a way to protect ourselves, a way to hide. And instead, if we simply state what we believe and deliver it with emotion, we are opening ourselves up to criticism, but we are also opening ourselves up to belief and connection.
And I think, Seth, this is how I look at things. When you say it's a way to hide, and I think when we do that, it's also because we are insecure. It's a sign of insecurity, not necessarily about ourselves, but sometimes insecurity about whether or not our message is relevant to the audience. That's what I see as well.
Yeah. And it's a good point.
Yeah. And Seth, another thing I wanted to ask you, and maybe you gave me an answer already, but just I want to give an opportunity in case you've got a few other ideas to explore here. Again, I think it was in Presentation Zen that you say that one of the reasons why so many ideas fail, it's because their champions use PowerPoint, and of course it could be any other presentation tool, it doesn't matter, the way Microsoft wants us to use the tool, not the way it should be used. Is there anything else that you'd like to add here beyond what we've discussed already? What is it that we do that makes you say that a lot of people use PowerPoint the way Microsoft wants us to use it and not the way it should be used?
Well, the specific is that Microsoft was developed by 3 engineers, and they built it the way they did to make it easier for them to give technical presentations where they didn't have to memorize a talk. So it's a cue card system, and it creates decks that you can leave behind that prove you told everyone the truth. When later on things don't work out, you can say, well, it's not my fault. Look at my deck. But I want to extend this to your job isn't to make the organizer of the conference happy. Your job is not to make the person who set up the stage happy. Your job is not to match the format of every speaker before or after you. Your job is to show up and transfer emotion in a way that is generous. So I'm not talking about hustling or hyping or deliberately being provocative. I'm saying, what would be the approach here? So when Simon Sinek did his TED Talk with a pad and a marker, was there a better high-tech solution than a pad and a marker? Of course there was. Would it have been easier for the organizers of wherever he gave that first TED Talk if he had just submitted his slides in advance? Of course. But would it have been as useful for the audience? No, because his scribbles on that whiteboard were a transfer of emotion. So he wasn't running the conference the way the organizer wanted. And so in my career of over 1,000 talks, I think most organizers would say I'm pretty easy to work with. But they would also say that I refuse to do things their way just because they asked me to, because I'm not there for them. I'm there for the people I'm trying to teach.
Yeah, and just because something has been done the way it's been done for years, it doesn't mean, yeah. All right. And Seth, if you think about what we've discussed today, we talked about communication, public speaking, presenting, how to get our ideas to spread beyond your own resources, which of course everybody knows them. You wrote, I think it's 20 now, best-selling books. Do you have one or more books in mind that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, my new book comes out May 30th. It's called The Song of Significance. And what I would say to people is, if you're going to bother making a presentation of any kind, please tell me before you start. I don't have to be in the audience, just me, Seth. What change are you seeking to make? Are you very clear about the change you seek? Is it possible at the end of the talk that change will have happened? If not, don't bother. If you can make that change happen, now you're on to something. And I love the book by Roz Zander and Ben Zander, The Art of Possibility. Gar's books are great. Nancy Duarte's books are great. There's countless books I could point you to. That's not really your problem. Your problem is you're hiding from the change you seek to make, because if you don't make it, you'll feel like a failure. And I wish I had known Ignaz Semmelweis. I think I could have helped him make the change he sought to make. I think I could have helped him tell a story that would have changed doctors' minds 20 years sooner, and a whole bunch of innocent women wouldn't be dead. So it's possible that your project doesn't involve innocent people dying or living. But if you're going to bother showing up in real time, you need to figure out who you're trying to change and what's the change you seek to make.
And that's the perfect place to end our conversation, Seth. Thank you so much again for your insights, for your time, for sharing your ideas. We are going to include for listeners your links, but also the links that you mentioned, for example, Ken Robinson, Do School, Skill Creativity, Simon Sinek with the Start With Why, TED Talk, Susan Cain, and all the others that you mentioned. And Seth, thank you very much again, and let's keep in touch.
Thanks, Andrea. Keep making a ruckus.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.